Dghi nan? Part 1 Se bat Buk Mo Bang Su Kien Vat Ly Lin Quan Truck Teep Den Mercedes Trong Workshop, Co HOA Exam Fam, Workshop by Chiem, Hao Qua Voi Kak Hung, Leverage Siu the Log Win Kim Sot Sung, Camera, Qua Bay, Ho So Tai San Va Qui Trin Je Xi Trong Ko So Tu Nan. The shop smelled like hot steel and cutting oil long after Deborah finally drove away that morning. The grinding wheel still hummed softly as it slowed to a stop. Sunlight spilled through the high windows and stretched across the concrete floor. I stood beside my welding table and looked at the empty space where her car had been parked. The space was mine again. At least for the moment. My name is Nathan Brooks. I own Brooks Fabrication, a metalworking shop my family built decades ago on the edge of town. Most days were simple. Gates. Railings. Equipment repairs. Custom steel work. The kind of jobs that kept food on the table and customers coming back. A loud bang echoed from the rear bay. One of my employees dropped a length of square tubing onto a workbench. Nobody laughed. Everyone had seen what happened that morning. That was the problem. Deborah never treated it like a mistake. She acted like she had permission. By noon, the smell of fresh paint mixed with welding smoke as we finished a ranch gate for a customer. I was loading the final pieces onto a trailer when my phone buzzed. The message came from the HOA office. Not Deborah directly. The office. That caught my attention. The email was short. They thanked me for my cooperation regarding temporary vehicle storage. I read it twice. Then a third time. Temporary vehicle storage. I stared at the screen while a forklift beeped somewhere behind me. Nobody had asked for cooperation. Nobody had requested permission. Yet somehow they already had language prepared to make it sound official. That detail stayed with me. Around 3 o'clock another surprise arrived. A landscaping contractor pulled into my lot looking confused. He asked where the HOA overflow parking area was located. I asked him what he meant. He handed me a printed map. My shop was highlighted in yellow. Several parking spaces had been drawn directly over my welding bays. For a moment all I could hear was the rattle of the overhead exhaust fan. Then I noticed the date on the document. The map had been distributed 2 weeks earlier. 2 weeks. Deborah had already been telling people my property was available before she ever spoke to me. The situation suddenly felt larger. That evening I stayed late after everyone else left. The shop grew quiet. Only the ticking of cooling metal broke the silence. I walked through each bay with a flashlight. Work orders sat stacked on desks. Customer projects waited on racks. Thousands of dollars in equipment filled the building. Then I stopped near the security office. A small monitor glowed in the darkness. Every camera feed appeared on screen. Front gate. Parking lot. Welding bays. Storage yard. Loading dock. 48 cameras in total. I watched footage from earlier that week. Then earlier still. 5 minutes turned into an hour. The deeper I looked, the more familiar certain vehicles became. One detail appeared far more often than it should have. And it was parked in places nobody had permission to use. The next morning started with the rattle of the front gate, and the low growl of an engine pulling into my lot before sunrise. I set down my coffee and looked through the office window. The same black luxury sedan rolled past the customer parking area and headed straight toward the fabrication bays. The sky was still dark. Yellow security lights reflected across polished paint. Deborah was not even trying to be discreet anymore. The smell of fresh-cut steel drifted through the shop as I stepped outside. She climbed out, adjusted her blazer, and walked toward me like she was arriving at a property she owned. Behind her came 2 more vehicles. Then another. HOA board members. I counted 4 cars. My welding crew had not even arrived yet. Deborah held a clipboard under one arm. "We are organizing temporary parking solutions," she said. The words sounded rehearsed. I looked past her shoulder. One board member was already placing orange traffic cones near my loading area. Another was taking measurements with a tape measure. Nobody had asked permission. Nobody had signed an agreement. Yet they were acting as if the decision had already been made. A sharp metallic crack echoed from inside the building as one of the cooling racks settled. Deborah barely reacted. That bothered me. Most people respected a fabrication shop. She treated it like empty real estate. I walked toward the cones and picked one up. The bright plastic felt warm from the early morning humidity. "These do not belong here," I said. Deborah smiled. Not a friendly smile. A confident one. "The community needs cooperation." There it was again. Community. Cooperation. Every time she wanted something, those words appeared. By 8 o'clock my employees arrived. Trucks filled the lot. Customers started showing up. The situation became messy fast. One rancher pulling a trailer had to back out because HOA vehicles blocked part of the entrance. Another customer asked if we were closing. I could feel the tension spreading. Deborah saw it too. She just did not care. Around noon I returned to the security office. The monitor screens glowed against the dim room. I started pulling footage from previous weeks. 1 day became 3. 3 became 7. The pattern was impossible to miss. Vehicles connected to the HOA appeared repeatedly. Not only in the parking lot. Inside the fenced storage yard. Near customer trailers. Beside equipment staging areas. The timestamps told the story. They had been using pieces of my property long before that morning. A notification suddenly appeared on my computer. New email received. The sender was Deborah Parker. I opened it. Attached was a PDF labeled Community Overflow Parking Proposal. My shop appeared on every page. Maps. Diagrams. Parking layouts. Reserved spaces. Future expansion options. My welding bays were marked as available storage zones. One section was highlighted in yellow. Proposed implementation date. The date was 3 days away. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the hum of the monitors. Deborah was no longer testing boundaries. She was building plans around property she did not own. Then I noticed a signature at the bottom of the document. The signature belonged to a commercial property consultant I had never met. I zoomed in on the PDF and read the name twice. The proposal looked polished. Professional. Expensive. Someone had spent real money planning how to use my property. The fluorescent lights in the security office buzzed overhead. Outside, a grinder screamed to life as my crew started another project. I printed the proposal and carried it into the shop. Warm metal dust hung in the air. Sparks flashed blue and orange across a fabrication table. My lead welder looked up as I spread the pages across a workbench. Nobody said much. They did not need to. The highlighted diagrams spoke for themselves. One section converted part of my loading zone into visitor parking. Another designated customer trailer space for HOA events. Then I found the page that changed everything. The final phase showed a fenced storage area extending directly into my rear yard. I stared at it while the smell of burned steel drifted through the building. Deborah was not looking for temporary parking anymore. She was designing permanent access. That afternoon I called the consultant. His receptionist transferred me twice before someone finally answered. The conversation became awkward almost immediately. The moment I identified the property address, the man went quiet. Then he apologized and ended the call. That reaction told me more than any explanation could have. Around 4 o'clock a customer arrived to pick up a custom cattle gate. His truck stopped near the entrance. Then stopped again. 2 HOA vehicles were parked where large trailers normally turned around. The customer climbed out and looked irritated. We spent 15 minutes moving equipment just to get him loaded. By the time he left, I had lost half an hour of production time. The sun dipped lower outside. Long shadows stretched across the concrete floor. Another email arrived before closing. This one came directly from Deborah. The subject line read Community Coordination Meeting. According to the message, she expected me to attend a board meeting the following evening to discuss implementation logistics. Not permission. Not negotiation. Implementation. I read that word 3 times. Then I noticed the attached agenda. My property appeared as an approved. Discussion item. Approved by whom? Nobody had contacted me. Nobody had signed anything. Yet somehow the board was already scheduling rollout plans. The next evening I drove to the clubhouse. The parking lot was full. Expensive SUVs lined both sides of the building. Warm light spilled through the front windows. Inside, the room smelled like coffee and fresh carpet. Deborah stood at the front speaking confidently beside a projector screen. Homeowners filled the seats. Some looked interested. Others looked bored. Then the slide changed. My shop appeared on the screen. A full aerial image. Parking overlays. Traffic arrows. Storage zones. Future usage projections. People nodded as she explained the benefits. She talked about efficiency, convenience, community growth. She never once mentioned ownership. I stayed in the back and listened. Then a homeowner raised his hand and asked a simple question. The room became very quiet after Deborah answered. The homeowner's question was simple. Does the HOA already own that property? You could have heard a pin drop. The projector hummed softly at the front of the room. Coffee cups stopped moving. Deborah smiled for half a second before answering. The board is working through community access arrangements. She never said yes. She never said no. The homeowner frowned. A few others exchanged glances. That was the first crack I had seen all night. I stayed quiet. I wanted people to hear her answers without my help. The meeting continued for another hour. Traffic flow. Parking shortages. Future growth. Every road somehow led back to my shop. By the time I walked outside, the air felt cool against my face. The smell of freshly cut grass drifted across the parking lot. Deborah exited the building a few minutes later. She spotted me immediately. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she approached. You should have spoken tonight, she said. I looked toward the clubhouse entrance. Homeowners were still leaving in small groups. You never asked me to participate. Her smile disappeared. The community needs solutions. There were those words again. Community. Solutions. I got into my truck and left before the conversation could go any farther. The next morning started with rain. Water tapped against the metal roof of the shop. The sound echoed through the building while my crew prepared equipment for the day. Around 9 o'clock, one of my office staff walked in holding a stack of envelopes. 3 customers had called asking whether access to the shop was changing. Someone had circulated information about future parking modifications. The rumors were spreading faster than the facts. That bothered me more than Deborah's emails. A customer can tolerate delays. A customer hates uncertainty. I spent most of the morning reviewing camera footage. Hours of recordings rolled across the screens. Trucks. Trailers. Deliveries. Employees. Then familiar vehicles appeared again. Not once. Not twice. Repeatedly. I started organizing clips into folders. Dates. Times. Locations. A pattern emerged. Certain board members treated my property like an extension of HOA facilities. One clip caught my attention. Deborah's luxury sedan sat inside the shop after business hours. Nobody from my company had moved it. The timestamp was nearly 3 weeks old. I watched the footage twice. Then 3 times. Another detail jumped out. The keys were still inside the vehicle when she walked away. That seemed careless. Or arrogant. I saved the clip. Around lunchtime, a certified letter arrived. The envelope felt heavy. Legal language filled several pages. The board requested cooperation regarding shared community resources and future logistical planning. They attached maps, timelines, proposed usage schedules. Every page assumed participation. Not one page requested consent. Outside, rainwater rolled down the windows. Forklifts moved slowly through the yard. The entire situation felt more organized than it should have been. Somebody had invested serious effort into this plan. Late that afternoon, I opened a storage cabinet in the office looking for an old contract file. Dust floated through a beam of sunlight. The cabinet held decades of business records, repair agreements, property documents, equipment leases. Then I found a folder I had not opened in years. What was inside made me stop turning pages. Inside the folder was an old property management agreement from years before I bought additional equipment for the shop. The paper smelled faintly of dust and machine oil. I sat at my desk while rain tapped against the office window and slowly turned the pages. Most of it covered routine storage procedures. Customer vehicles. Equipment left for repair. Temporary access rules. Then I reached a section highlighted by my father decades ago. A handwritten note sat in the margin beside it. The ink had faded, but I could still read every word. Protect this section. It matters. I leaned closer. The clause explained how unauthorized vehicles left inside the secured work area could be documented, restricted from access, and held until ownership and authorization issues were resolved through established procedures. It was not dramatic. It was not complicated. It was simply a policy created to protect the business. Outside, a delivery truck backed into the yard. Its reverse alarm echoed through the rain. I read the clause again. Then a third time. Suddenly several pieces began fitting together. The camera footage. The repeated entries. The emails. The proposal maps. Deborah had spent weeks acting as though my property already belonged to the HOA. The difference was that I finally understood exactly where the boundaries were. Around noon the rain stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds and reflected off puddles in the parking lot. I carried the folder into the security office and started organizing everything. Video clips. Emails. Letters. Photographs. Visitor logs. Every document received its own folder. Every date matched a timestamp. Hours passed. The glow from the monitors filled the room while forklifts moved materials outside. Then another pattern appeared. Several of Deborah's visits happened on weekends when the shop was closed. Her vehicle remained inside the secured fabrication area for long stretches of time. Nobody from my company requested it. Nobody signed it in. Nobody approved it. That detail mattered. By late afternoon, my desk looked like an evidence board. Papers covered nearly every surface. My office manager walked in carrying a stack of invoices. She stopped when she saw the mess. "That looks serious." I nodded. "It is becoming serious." She looked at one of the printed photographs. Deborah's sedan sat between two welding stations. "How long has this been going on?" Longer than either of us realized. That evening I stayed after everyone left. The building settled into silence. Cooling steel clicked softly in the darkness. The smell of oil and warm metal lingered in the air. I walked through the fabrication bays with a flashlight. Shadows stretched across the concrete floor. Then I reached the area where Deborah usually parked. Fresh tire marks were still visible. I followed them toward the rear exit. Something caught my attention near the wall. A laminated notice. It had been installed recently. I stepped closer and shined the flashlight on it. The notice listed temporary HOA parking directions. My address appeared at the top. Somebody had physically placed instructions inside my building. I pulled the sign down and turned it over. A small sticker remained on the back. It identified the printing company that produced it. The same company listed on Deborah's proposal documents. I slipped the sign into a folder and headed back toward the office. The shop was dark now. Only the security monitors remained lit. Then one screen flashed with a live motion alert from the front gate. The motion alert came from the front gate at 9:47 that night. I clicked the live feed and leaned closer to the monitor. Headlights swept across the gravel entrance. Then a familiar luxury sedan rolled into view. Deborah. The gate was closed. The shop was closed. Yet there she was. The camera timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen while the vehicle eased through the entrance and headed toward the fabrication bays. My office felt completely silent except for the soft hum of the monitors. I watched her park in the same area she always used. The driver's door opened. Deborah stepped out carrying a folder under one arm. A second vehicle followed a minute later. Then a third. Board members. They walked through the lot as if they were inspecting their own property. One pointed toward the loading area. Another toward the storage yard. Deborah unfolded papers beneath a parking lot light and began showing them around. I saved the footage immediately. Then I saved it again to a separate drive. Something about their confidence stood out. They were not discussing possibilities anymore. They were planning operations. The next morning the shop filled with the smell of hot steel and fresh coffee. Forklifts moved material across the yard. Welders threw bright sparks against thick steel plates. I arrived early and spent an hour reviewing the previous night's recordings. The details were even clearer in daylight. Deborah had walked through multiple restricted work zones. She had pointed out customer staging areas. She had marked sections of the property with temporary flags. None of it had authorization. Around 10 o'clock, one of my suppliers stopped by with a delivery. Before he unloaded, he handed me a flyer he found posted near the HOA entrance. My address appeared in bold print. Community Overflow Parking Launch. I stared at the paper while trucks rumbled outside. According to the flyer, the new parking arrangement would begin the following weekend. The date was already scheduled. The routes were mapped. Volunteer attendants were assigned. My property was listed throughout the document as if ownership had already been transferred. I folded the flyer and placed it beside the growing stack of evidence on my desk. By afternoon I made a decision. I stopped responding to Deborah's emails. I stopped answering board messages. I stopped arguing. Every conversation ended the same way anyway. Instead, I documented everything. The cameras recorded every vehicle. The access logs recorded every entry. The visitor records tracked every arrival. Piece by piece, the picture became impossible to ignore. Then Friday arrived. The air smelled like rain again. Clouds rolled across the sky while my crew finished the week's final jobs. Customers picked up equipment. Trailers left the yard. One by one, the welding bays emptied. Just before closing, the familiar luxury sedan appeared again. Deborah parked inside the fabrication area and stepped out without hesitation. She spoke briefly with one board member. Then both walked away. Toward another vehicle. Minutes later, every HOA vehicle exited the property. Everyone left. Except one. The luxury sedan remained parked directly inside the secured work zone. I looked through the office window at the empty building. The overhead doors were about to come down for the weekend. The cameras were recording. The logs were complete. The policy folder sat on my desk. And for the first time, every piece was exactly where it needed to be. The overhead doors rolled down with a deep metallic rumble. One by one, the locks clicked into place. Evening light faded across the concrete floor. The shop smelled like warm steel, machine oil, and rain drifting in through the loading area. Deborah's sedan remained exactly where she left it. Parked inside a secured fabrication bay. Parked inside a private work zone. Parked inside a building she had spent weeks treating like community property. I walked back to the office carrying the policy folder. The security monitors glowed blue in the dim room. Every camera angle confirmed the same thing. The vehicle had been left voluntarily. No employee had moved it. No customer had requested storage. No agreement existed. I completed the documentation process step by step. Time. Date. Location. Camera references. Visitor logs. Everything matched. There was something satisfying about watching facts line up. Facts did not argue. Facts did not send emails. Facts simply existed. Saturday morning arrived quietly. Sunlight streamed through the upper windows. The shop was closed. No grinders. No forklifts. No welders. Just silence. Around 9 o'clock my phone rang. Deborah. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later it rang again. Then again. By lunchtime there were 7 missed calls. A text message followed. She wanted immediate access to the building. Another message arrived moments later. Then another. The tone changed with each one. Confidence faded. Urgency replaced it. Outside, wind pushed leaves across the empty parking lot. I reviewed the camera feeds while eating lunch at my desk. Shortly after 1 o'clock, Deborah arrived in person. She stepped out of an SUV and marched toward the front entrance. The cameras captured every movement. She pulled on the locked door. Then she walked around the building checking other entrances. The shop remained closed. Just like every other weekend. 20 minutes later another vehicle arrived. Then another. Several HOA board members joined her near the front gate. They talked. Pointed. Checked their phones. Eventually everyone left. The cameras recorded all of it. Sunday afternoon brought another surprise. An attorney contacted my office requesting information regarding the vehicle. I returned the call. The conversation remained professional. Very professional. I explained the documentation. The access logs. The camera footage. The established policies. Long pauses followed several of my answers. By the end of the call, the attorney sounded much less certain than when he started. Monday morning the shop came back to life. Sparks flashed from welding stations. Forklifts moved steel tubing through the yard. Customers arrived with trailers and work orders. The familiar rhythm returned. Around 10 o'clock Deborah appeared at the front office. This time she looked different. No presentation folders. No parking diagrams. No speeches about community solutions. She sat across from me while sunlight reflected off the office window. The room felt unusually quiet. I placed several documents on the desk between us. Visitor records. Camera timestamps. Property maps. Copies of the proposal materials. Her expression changed as she turned each page. Then I slid one final item across the desk. The flyer announcing the launch of parking operations on my property. For the first time in weeks, Deborah had nothing to say. She simply stared at the paper. Then she noticed something attached behind it that I had not shown anyone else yet. Attached behind the flyer was a screenshot from one of the security cameras. The image showed Deborah standing inside my fabrication bay 3 weeks earlier. In her hand was the same parking proposal she had presented to homeowners. The timestamp sat clearly in the corner. So did the location marker identifying the restricted work area. Deborah stared at the image for several seconds. The office felt completely silent. Outside, a forklift rolled across the yard. The faint beep of its reverse alarm drifted through the window. She slowly set the paper back on the desk. Then she noticed the stack underneath it. More screenshots. More dates. More timestamps. Every visit. Every vehicle. Every unauthorized use of the property. The confidence I had seen for weeks was gone. In its place was calculation. She understood exactly what she was looking at. "How many people have copies of this?" she asked. I looked toward the security office across the hall. Monitors glowed behind the glass. "Enough." Another long silence followed. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the break room. Welders worked somewhere deeper in the building. Life inside the shop continued normally. That was the part one appreciated most. The facts did not require drama. They simply existed. Over the next few days, several things happened very quickly. The parking launch disappeared from community announcements. The flyers vanished. The proposal documents stopped circulating. Emails that once sounded certain suddenly became cautious. Homeowners started asking questions. Real questions. Questions about ownership. Questions about authorization. Questions about why community resources had been planned around property the HOA did not control. Then came the board meeting. The clubhouse was packed. Every seat was occupied. People lined the walls. The room smelled like coffee and printer paper. Deborah stood at the front beside several board members. This time there was no projector displaying expansion plans. No diagrams. No parking maps. Just discussion. Homeowners wanted answers. One resident held up a copy of the flyer. Another referenced property records. Someone else asked about liability. The questions kept coming. The board spent most of the evening responding instead of directing. The balance had shifted. A week later, a formal notice arrived confirming that all plans involving my property had been withdrawn. Every proposal. Every parking arrangement. Every future usage concept. Gone. The shop returned to normal almost immediately. Customer trailers filled the loading area again. Deliveries arrived without confusion. Employees no longer had to work around unauthorized vehicles. The rhythm of the business returned. One Friday afternoon I walked through the fabrication bay where all of this started. Sunlight streamed through the upper windows. Sparks flashed from a welding station. The familiar smell of steel and machine oil filled the air. I stopped near the exact spot where Deborah's sedan had spent so much time. The concrete looked ordinary. Just another section of floor inside a working shop. Yet that small space had exposed an entire chain of assumptions. People thought confidence could replace permission. They thought repetition could replace ownership. They thought nobody would check. In the end, nobody needed a dramatic confrontation. Nobody needed revenge. The cameras told the story. The records confirmed it. The facts handled the rest. I switched off the office lights that evening and listened to the shop settle into silence. Some people build plans around what they hope is true. I prefer building around what can be proven.